Hi everyone who is watching this. Welcome to our Lit Circle presentation. The book we read was Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, and the people in our group is Catherine, Gabby, John, Sydney, and me, Mikey. So just a quick overview about what the book is about. The first thing to understand is the family tree, which is important to understand the chapters and the organization of the stories. So the mame at the bottom is the mother of Afia and Essie, who are half sisters. From there, they are going to be the first two chapters, and then from there, their descendants, their son or their daughter, is going to be the next chapter. So you can see how it goes from Quay to James to Abina. Same thing on the other side of Essie's family line. And so each chapter will represent a different descendant. So a quick summary about the plot. The story is going to follow the two lineages of separated half-sisters Afia and Essie, who unfortunately never get to meet. When we dive into each chapter, readers will get to read and understand the experiences of the descendants' life during different time periods, which are very important to the story. And this book overall, Yaa Gyasi, really immerses readers into the different stories and experiences of African Americans throughout history. Main settings of this novel is in Afantiland and Asante-land, which is regions in present-day Ghana, and it's also taken place in the United States, all over the United States. The time period we estimated was around the 1760s to the 1960s.
Yes, so there were a few themes and ideas that Yaa Gyasi used throughout her book, and the first one that we wanted to talk about was social status versus family relationships. A core theme of Homegoing is the effect that family has on an individual. So, for instance, comparing Effia and Essie's lives, Effia at the beginning of the book was a very beautiful girl in her village, but she was very mistreated in her home by many of the people there, which led her to have not so great a childhood. But later on in life, she was then married to someone who was very wealthy and who had a lot of power in Fanteland at that time, compared to Essie, who was like the princess of her village and was very beloved, but she was captured and sold into slavery. John, do you have any other things to talk about for this?
Yeah, I definitely feel like this is a prevalent theme throughout the book. The choice that characters have to make between their own wants and relationship versus what might be best for their family or what would be better for social standings. So if we look at Quay or James, Quay in particular decided to forego his own wants in a relationship to marry someone of a higher birth. That way it would allow his bloodline to be of a noble standing within the villages, versus James, who is Quay's son, who was of high birth, forsook all of that because of he didn't want to be involved in his family's business and didn't want the noble birth, but he wanted the life with the girl that he fell in love with. So if we look at those, we definitely see the choices that the different characters have to make, which one they value more. Did you have any thoughts on that, Catherine?
Yeah, so I also saw that another a sub theme to this was that a person's choice always had an impact on their children. And so whether this was these were consequences or whatnot, we see that through the supporting characters such as Essie's father, Big Man Asare, who made choices to prioritize societal standing or familial relationships. And so we see that this character who has a lot of power strives to continue to have that power instead of cultivating and growing in his relationships with his family. And so we see this as a reoccurring theme as the chapters advance as well. And so I would definitely say that whether these people whether the choices they made were good or bad, it definitely had consequences for their children and then their children and so on and so on. And Mikey, would you have any quotes, evidence, or anything to add?
Yes, there's a lot of instances throughout the story where this happens. So for example, Abina, she was very excited to be with the man of her dreams that she loved. But this man, he wanted to save the village. And in order to get these cocoa plants, which would help thrive and bring growth to the village, he had to end up marrying another daughter. So we can see that instead of choosing Abina, he chose the village and his status as a leader over Abina. We see in Ness, a mother who is a slave and who's pregnant. She realizes that my son is not going to do well in this plantation. So she makes the sacrifice of picking her son above her safety and her husband's, who ends up being hanged. And we can see that she really cares about her family and she'll do anything to make that big sacrifice to have a better life for her son. We see in Willie, her Roberts, unfortunately, decided to pick and give in into society standards and culture at the time to fit in. Because he was a bit more light-skinned, people kind of mistaken him for a white man. So he decided to change up his look, his clothes, so he can fit in. And eventually he ended up choosing fitting into that society rather than loving his wife and his son. So he ended up leaving the family.
Right. So there was a lot of tension between a person choosing family over societal power or standing, in a sense. Another theme or another symbol, or a huge symbol, a part of Yaa Gyasi's book, was the destructive nature of fire. She uses fire as a conventional and contextual symbol in Homegoing. John, do you have any things to talk about the conventional symbol of fire in the book?
Yeah, if we look at the book, I mean, starting basically from the beginning, we see the destructive nature of fire in a literal sense, as Mame left her first husband, which meant she also left her first daughter, Effia. She set a fire to escape, and that we see the destructive nature in that fire that was set, and that sets the tone going forward of what fire is, how it should be treated. But also there's a direct correlation between the destructive nature of fire and the destructive nature of family. If we look at both the both sides of the lineage, we see that slavery is prevalent. On Essie's side, they come from a background of slavery, that they are slaves. And as Essie is sold into slavery, and Effie's side, she marries a white man, and he is the governor and is a facilitator in the slave trade at that time. So if you look at it, you see kind of the consequences of slavery and the destructiveness, even going into Yao's story and how he got the scars from burns. And as his mother explains, that was kind of the consequence of the actions of their ancestors, which unfortunately led to Yao being burned and the death of his sisters. Did you have any further thoughts on that, Catherine?
Yeah, so I would also say that the use of fire is seen as a punishment for the past sins slash actions of the ancestors, especially in Afia's line. And so we see that fire has a very, very negative connotation in this book. It's something that's feared upon, and like you are learn to like be cautious around fire, and it's passed down through each generation, this piece of information that like fire is dangerous, fire is bad, and we should avoid fire at all times. And so I feel like this is a reoccurring theme. And then we also see towards the end of the book just as how like the book began, that it comes full circle, as fire is one of Marjorie's fears. And so yeah, I would totally agree with that as well. And Mikey, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so right from the get-go, the first sentence, the first page of the book started with a fire. And from fire, there's a lot, like Catherine said, a negative connotation, because Afia, who was born from a fire, they're like, oh, she's cursed, something bad happened. And we know that fire usually ignites danger, ignites harm. So even in Akua's chapter, unfortunately, she was sleeping, and then next thing you know, one of her kids were on fire. A lot of times fire is dangerous, and our parents tell us, don't go near fire, don't touch it, you're gonna get burned. So in a way, also, like, fire in the story symbolizes caution. It symbolizes also danger and fear that something bad is going to happen. With Marjorie, we can see that from the story of her grandmother with the fire, we can see that she's more cautious now. She's scared that, oh no, fire is going to harm me. So a lot of times fire is definitely a sign of be careful.
Right, yeah. So as a conventional symbol, Yaa Gyasi used it as a kind of a warning and a danger sign, but it also used it in a contextual symbol, and the fact that it kind of connected each of Effia's descendants to Mame, and the fact that they had instances with fire that either harmed them or was a danger to them. Another theme in Homegoing is the enslavement mentality. Um, Characters are fixed in a recurring pattern of some form of slavery, whether that is actual slavery in the beginning with Essie's descendants being sent to America, or the mental enslavement with Afia's line, and the fact that they were either enslaved to the powers that were above them, or they were enslaved to societal standards, or even later on in the book with Sonny, he was enslaved to drugs in the United States. So, John, is there any other instances that you can think of in the book?
Yeah, the pattern of slavery is definitely something we see as cyclical in the book. Each person is touched by slavery at some point, either being a slaver or being a slave themselves, um, or running away from slavery. If you look at James's case, he didn't want to be a slaver, so he ran away, partially to be with the woman that he loved, but also because he didn't want to be involved in slavery. But if you look at each person or each character throughout, slavery is still a main theme. And like you said, with Sonny, even some of this is even a little self-inflicted. He wanted to be a part of, he wanted to fit in with the crowd that he was hanging out with at the time, and even the woman that he would fall in love with. So he chose a pattern of in the life of drugs, which in turn continued the cycle of slavery. But we see slavery even through H's story. Even though he was free, he ended up being enslaved again with by being imprisoned and having to work in the mines for about 10 years. So even though some of them actually get their freedom, the way that they have to endure life and the oppression and whatnot, and even things outside of their own concept, even things outside of their choosing, or even like just other mitigating factors, keep them enslaved, not necessarily in a literal sense, but in the sense that they're not able to thrive as human beings. Did you have anything to add, Catherine?
Yeah, I totally agree with you in the sense that the cycle of enslavement is self-inflicted, and I feel like there's a contrast between specifically James and Sonny's story, where they were given a choice to whether they wanted to be enslaved or be the enslaver. And we see that in Sonny's story, unfortunately, he gives in to the drug addiction and becomes enslaved to it. But with James, he doesn't want to be like his father, and he wants to be different and does not choose to take that path. And so I feel like through each generation, as each of the characters in the lineage are enslaved, they feel as if they don't have a choice and that they don't have that freedom that they strive or want to look for. And so yeah, I definitely feel like that is a important theme in this book as well. And Mikey, would you want to add anything to that or support?
Yes. So throughout the story, there's a lot of different forms of slavery. And like you were saying, some of them was self-inflicted, some of them were not. I felt that a lot of the times in the beginning of the chapters, the beginning descendants, the ancestors, like Afia, they felt that they were cursed, and they, because in their culture, like being cursed is a huge deal in their culture. So if they're cursed, it's going to be cursed throughout the next family, the next lineage, the next generation after that. So they kind of felt like, oh, I can't escape this. I think in Essie's chapter, Mame really quotes slavery very well. Weakness is treating someone as though they belong to you. Strength is knowing that everyone belongs to themselves. And that doesn't have to be with slavery. Just like with Sani, he was enslaved to drugs and he couldn't escape it. With H, even though at that time he was technically a free man, he still ended up going back into the cycle of labor in the mines. And even though he did end up being free, he went back again. Again, we see this never ending cycle of African Americans being enclosed in this never ending cycle of being trapped in some sort of slavery, whether it's drugs, whether it's labor, whether it's society standards. There's a lot that's happening. Even in Kojo's chapter, they thought his family was free, and then next thing you know, his wife was kidnapped. Again, we see family being robbed, just another unfortunate events, and this never-ending cycle will just keep going.
Yeah, and so yeah, so this enslavement mentality that kind of goes throughout the book is a way that could also kind of connects each of the descendants to each other. And as a final thought to this whole book was a great quote from near the end in Yaa's chapter, and it goes as follows. We believe the one who has the power. He is the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must always ask yourself, whose story am I missing? And that is a great quote for this book, in essence, that there are so many stories a part of this book. These are the stories that are kind of missing that we get to hear about. Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth. And so I think Yaa Gyasi does a great job in showing the multiple stories that come along with the after effects of what slavery has done to so many people throughout the centuries. And I think the way she put it together was an amazing thing. John, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I thought she did a really great job with this book. The imagery she used and different literary tools helped to develop the setting, which actually made me feel like I was there. So I thought the book itself, like in general, was just a really good book. But the book actually has a really good ending as well, where the two lines do actually come together and get to meet with Marjorie and Marcus, and they get to overcome some of their own fears, with Marjorie overcoming her fear of fire at the end, and Marcus overcoming his fear of water at the end, which kind of led to a reconciliation between the two different lines, which was a really nice fitting ending for this book. Did you have anything, Catherine?
Yeah, I would say I really enjoyed the ending as well, and overall the structure of this book. I never read anything like this where it was in like where it described each character and their story and through the lineage and all. And this book did have a lot of ups and downs, which I think made it more enjoyable to read. And there were also so many cultural and historical ties, which helped me to learn better about like what I was reading, because it was in a sense based on actual events that took place through history. And so, yeah, I would definitely agree with that as well.
For me personally, this book really reminded me of this novel I read called Things Fall Apart. But I really love this book because it expands more than just colonialism and those times. It expands from over 200 years. So we get a big time period of all the experiences that African Americans went through. And I felt that Gyasi does a great job with her writing. It really appeals to readers' emotions, gives you like that shock value, like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. And in reality, these are experiences that actually happened throughout history. And I think it's great that she brought into light these different hardships and experiences, this can be uncomfortable to talk about and kind of tense, but I think she did an amazing job, and I really do hope a lot of people get to read the story.
Yes, and so we thank you so much for watching our presentation, and Gabby will give a final thought as well in the Google Slides with an audio clip. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.